Three Navy recruits cornered her in the mess hall at 18:15 hours on a Tuesday evening in late September. 45 seconds later, they learned that Lieutenant Caitlin Mercer was a Navy SEAL. But what happened in those 45 seconds would echo through Naval Base Coronado for decades to come, changing not just three young men's understanding of capability, but the entire institution's perception of what a warrior could be. The story, however, didn't begin in that mess hall. It began 21 days earlier when Caitlin first stepped onto the sun-bleached concrete of Naval Base Coronado with a single duffel bag and the weight of history on her shoulders. The California morning had been crisp and clear, the kind of dawn that made the Pacific seem almost peaceful despite the military machinery that lined the harbor. Caitlin had reported to Captain Frank Hastings at 0800 hours sharp, her uniform pressed to razor precision, her bearing reflecting 2 years of the most demanding training the United States military had ever devised. Captain Hastings had looked up from his desk with eyes that revealed nothing, neither approval nor disapproval, just the professional assessment of the man who had spent 25 years evaluating warriors and knew that first impressions were often deceptive. "Lieutenant Mercer," he had said, his voice carrying the flat authority of command, "welcome to Coronado. Your reputation precedes you." Caitlin had stood at attention, her response measured and precise. "Thank you, sir. I'm ready to serve." Hastings had studied her for a long moment, and in that silence, Caitlin understood that this wasn't just about her assignment. This was about what she represented: a test case, an experiment, a question mark at the end of a sentence the military had been writing for generations. "You'll find Coronado different from training," Hastings had said finally. "Here you're not just proving yourself to instructors who are paid to evaluate you objectively. You're proving yourself to men who have strong opinions about what you represent and what your presence here means for the future of their teams." He had paused, choosing his next words with care. "I won't lie to you, Lieutenant. There are people on this base who believe women have no place in special operations. There are others who support integration but question the timeline. And there are a very few who are willing to judge you solely on your demonstrated performance." Caitlin had met his gaze steadily. "I understand, sir. I didn't come here to change minds with words. I came here to change them with performance." Hastings had nodded once sharply. "Good, because performance is the only currency that matters in the teams. Everything else is just noise." The first 3 weeks at Coronado had been a masterclass in endurance. Not physical endurance, though the training regimen remained punishing, but psychological endurance of a kind Caitlin hadn't fully anticipated during her time in Buds. Every morning began with physical training at 0530 hours. Caitlin would arrive 10 minutes early, already stretched and mentally prepared for whatever the day's session would demand. The PT instructors ran the unit through 5-mile runs along the beach, their boots pounding the sand in rhythmic unison, while the sun rose over the Pacific like a witness to their suffering. Caitlin consistently finished in the top third of the unit, her time hovering around 5 minutes and 30 seconds per mile, faster than 20% of the men running alongside her, slower than the elite few who seemed to glide over the sand like they were born to it. It should have been unremarkable. In any rational evaluation system, finishing ahead of most of your peers would be considered strong performance. But nothing about Caitlin's presence at Coronado was evaluated rationally. When she finished a run in the top 10, she could hear the whispers rippling through the formation like wind through tall grass. When she completed her pull-ups, 23 strict repetitions with perfect form, she could feel eyes tracking her movements with an intensity that went beyond professional interest. When she demonstrated her proficiency with the M4 carbine, placing 58 of 60 rounds in the center mass of targets at 100 meters, she watched senior enlisted personnel exchange glances that spoke volumes about doubt and skepticism. The scrutiny was constant and exhausting in ways that physical training had never been. Caitlin had learned during Hell Week that she could push her body beyond limits she had never imagined. She had discovered during underwater demolition training that she could master her fear of drowning and confined spaces. She had proven during advanced tactics training that she could think clearly under pressure and make sound decisions when lives hung in the balance. But nothing in her training had fully prepared her for the psychological weight of being watched, judged, and evaluated every single moment of every single day. Equipment requisitions that should have taken 24 hours stretched into 48 or 72. Training range reservations somehow developed system errors that canceled her scheduled slots. Gear issued from supply rooms arrived in wrong sizes, boots that pinched tactical vests that didn't fit properly, helmets that sat uncomfortably on her head. Each incident in isolation could be dismissed as simple military bureaucracy at its inefficient worst. But Caitlin had not survived SEAL training by being naive about patterns and intentions. She began documenting everything times dates personnel involved specific problems encountered. The pattern that emerged was clear and undeniable. Every incident involved personnel under the authority of Command Master Chief William Ashford, the senior enlisted leader at Coronado. She never complained, not once, not when her equipment requests were delayed, not when her training schedules were disrupted, not when she overheard conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Caitlin understood that complaining would be interpreted as weakness, and weakness was the one thing she could not afford to show. Instead, she adapted. She learned to requisition equipment earlier than needed, building buffer time into her planning. She arrived at training ranges early and stayed late using whatever time was available, rather than insisting on her scheduled slots. She adjusted ill-fitting gear and made it work through sheer determination and improvisation. And through it all, she maintained a professional demeanor that gave her critics nothing to latch onto. No displays of frustration, no moments of visible anger, no complaints that could be characterized as whining or special pleading. But there was one person watching who saw beyond the surface performance to the warrior beneath. Master Chief Robert Callahan had spent 35 years in the Navy SEALs, and he had seen things that would break most men's spirits and test even the strongest warriors' resolve. He had served during the final years of the Cold War, when the teams operated in shadows and silence against adversaries who never acknowledged their existence. He had been there during Desert Storm in 1991, leading his squad through operations near Basra that remain classified to this day. He had trained hundreds of SEALs over 3.5 decades, and he had developed an instinct for identifying warriors who possessed not just physical capability, but the mental toughness and moral character that separated good operators from legendary ones. On the afternoon of Day 15, Callahan stood in the observation tower, overlooking the underwater demolition training pool, watching Caitlin complete a drill that tested combat swimming skills under simulated combat conditions. The exercise required participants to swim 50 meters underwater while navigating obstacles simulating the approach to a hostile shore under cover of darkness. Most sailors completed the course in 75 to 90 seconds, surfacing once or twice for breath. The elite performers, usually veteran SEALs with years of experience, could manage it in 60 to 70 seconds with a single surface. Caitlin completed the course in 68 seconds without surfacing once. When she emerged from the pool, her face was calm and controlled, showing none of the strain that the oxygen-starved swim should have produced. She pulled herself onto the deck with efficient movements, accepted the towel handed to her by a training assistant, and moved immediately to the next station without fanfare or self-congratulation. Callahan watched her go, his weathered face thoughtful. He turned to the chief standing beside him, a man named Richardson, who had served under Callahan during Desert Storm, and respected his judgment without question. "What do you see when you watch her, Rich?" Callahan asked quietly. Richardson considered the question, his eyes following Caitlin as she moved through the training cycle. "I see someone who's competent, very competent. But competence isn't the question, is it?" "No," Callahan agreed. "Competence has never been the question. The question has always been whether this institution is ready to accept competence when it comes packaged in a way they didn't expect." Richardson was silent for a moment. "You think she can make it here, not just survive, but actually earn their respect?" Callahan's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried absolute certainty. "I've seen a lot of warriors in 35 years, Rich. She's got something different. She's got purpose. That enough? We're about to find out." Later that afternoon, and after Caitlin had completed her training cycle and the other sailors had dispersed to their next obligations, Callahan made his presence known. He approached her as she was stowing her gear in the equipment locker, his footsteps deliberately audible so as not to startle her. Caitlin's turn came immediately to attention when she recognized the Master Chief's rank insignia. "Master Chief," Callahan nodded acknowledgement. "As you were, Lieutenant. That was solid work today on the underwater course." "Thank you, Master Chief." Caitlin's response was professional and measured, revealing nothing about how much that simple acknowledgement meant after 3 weeks of relentless scrutiny. Callahan studied her for a moment, his pale blue eyes seeing more than most people revealed. I watched the first Black SEALs integrate into the teams back in the early 80s, he said without preamble. Faced a lot of the same skepticism you're dealing with now. Different reasons, same fundamental resistance to change. He paused, letting that context settle. You know how they earned their place, not by being adequate, not by meeting the minimum standards. They earned it by being so damn good that denying their capability made the people doing the denying look like fools. Caitlin met his gaze directly. I understand, Master Chief. I don't think you do, not yet. Callahan's voice was gentle but firm. Because what you're facing isn't just about proving you can do the job. It's about proving you can do it while carrying the weight of everyone who will come after you. Every woman who looks at what you accomplish here and thinks maybe she can do it too, they're all riding on your performance. He let that sink in, watching her face for signs of being overwhelmed by the pressure. He saw none, just quiet determination and unwavering focus. I'm not telling you this to add pressure, Callahan continued. I'm telling you because I think you need to understand the larger picture. This isn't just about Caitlin Mercer proving herself at Coronado. This is about whether this institution is ready to accept that capability comes in forms they didn't anticipate. Caitlin absorbed his words, processed their implications. And if they're not ready, Master Chief, what then? Callahan smiled slightly, an expression that carried 3.5 decades of hard-won wisdom. Then you make them ready. Same way every pioneer has made institutions ready throughout history by being undeniably excellent. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Lieutenant. The scrutiny you're experiencing, the delays, the complications, the constant evaluation, that's not going to ease up. If anything, it's going to intensify. The question isn't whether you can handle it. The question is whether you understand that handling it is part of the mission. I understand, Master Chief. Callahan nodded once sharply. Then he was gone, leaving Caitlin alone with her gear and her thoughts. Not everyone at Coronado watched Caitlin with professional assessment or quiet support. There were those whose observation came from a darker place, from resentment, fear, and a bone-deep conviction that her presence represented something dangerous and wrong. Brock Ashford was 22 years old, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, with the kind of all-American good looks that came from excellent genetics and a comfortable upbringing. He stood 6'2", with the build of someone who had played football in high school and maintained his athletic conditioning through military training. His uniform was always immaculate, his bearing suggesting confidence born from never having encountered a problem that couldn't be solved through determination, charm, or the influence of a well-connected father. That father was Command Master Chief William Ashford, the senior enlisted leader at Naval Base Coronado, and a man whose opinion carried enormous weight in the tight-knit SEAL community. Brock had grown up in military housing, surrounded by warriors who spoke reverently about honor, sacrifice, and the brotherhood of the teams. He had joined the Navy immediately after high school, with dreams of following his father's path into the SEAL community. And he had watched his younger brother Ethan follow that same path 2 years later with pride and protective concern. Then 2 years ago, Ethan had died in Afghanistan. The official report said it was a helicopter crash during a routine transport mission. Mechanical failure, catastrophic, and sudden, giving the crew no time to respond. 7 service members killed instantly, including 19-year-old seaman Ethan Ashford, who had been excited about his first deployment and eager to prove himself worthy of the family legacy. But the unofficial whispers, the conversations that happened in quiet corners between men who trusted each other, told a different story. The pilot had been female, relatively inexperienced, promoted through a system that was under pressure to show progress on integration initiatives. Standards had been adjusted, some said. Qualifications had been loosened. And 7 people had paid the price for political correctness, including Brock's little brother. Brock Ashford had never verified whether those whispers were true. He had never investigated the official report or questioned the findings of the Accident Review Board. He didn't need to, because the whispers confirmed what he already believed, that the military's obsession with integration and diversity was compromising combat readiness and costing lives. And now, walking through the base where his father commanded respect and his brother's memory hung like a ghost, Brock watched Caitlin Mercer complete her training cycles with growing resentment and barely controlled anger. On the evening of day 18, Brock sat in the junior enlisted barracks with 2 friends who shared his general worldview, if not the depth of his personal motivation. Travis Whitlock was shorter and more powerfully built than Brock, with dark hair and suspicious eyes that seemed constantly alert for threats. Garrett Hayes was tall and red-haired, uncomfortable with conflict, but loyal to his friends in ways that sometimes overrode his better judgment. "Did you see her on the range today?" Travis was saying, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone looking for confirmation of pre-existing beliefs. 58 out of 60. That's good shooting. "That's adequate shooting," Brock corrected sharply. "The top performers put all 60 in center mass. She's good, but she's not exceptional. And good isn't enough when lives are on the line." Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know, man. 58 out of 60 is better than I can do. Better than most of us can do." Brock turned cold eyes on his friend. "That's not the point, Garrett. The point is that she's here because the Navy is under pressure to show progress on integration. The point is that standards get adjusted, maybe not officially, but in 1,000 small ways to make sure the experiment succeeds. And the point is that when standards drop, people die." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Both Travis and Garrett knew about Ethan. Everyone on base knew about Ethan. It was the kind of tragedy that rippled through the close-knit military community and left permanent marks on everyone it touched. "I'm not saying she's incompetent," Brock continued, his voice softer but no less intense. "I'm saying her competence isn't being evaluated the same way ours is. I'm saying that when she makes a mistake, it'll be overlooked or explained away because too many people have invested too much political capital in making this work. And I'm saying that when the inevitable happens, when someone dies, because we prioritize diversity over capability, it'll be too late to fix it." Travis nodded slowly. "So what do we do about it?" Brock was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he thought through options and consequences. "We watch, we document, and when the opportunity comes to demonstrate why this is a bad idea, we take it." Garrett looked distinctly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was heading. "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind that shows everyone what we already know, that this is a mistake that's going to cost lives if we don't stop it now." The mess hall at Naval Base Coronado was a utilitarian structure that prioritized function over aesthetics. Long rows of tables filled a space designed to feed hundreds of personnel efficiently during peak mealtimes. The walls were painted institutional beige, broken up by windows that looked out over training facilities, where the next generation of naval warriors honed their skills against the backdrop of the setting California sun. On the evening of day 21, Caitlin entered the mess hall at 18:15 hours, her timing deliberate to avoid the peak rush while still falling within normal dinner hours. She carried a worn tactical manual under her arm, Small Unit Tactics in Urban Environments, and wore the same professional expression she maintained throughout every interaction at Coronado: competent, focused, approachable, but not seeking approval. The conversations that had filled the space quieted noticeably as she moved through the serving line. It wasn't the complete silence that had marked her first week. People were adjusting to her presence, learning to treat it as the new normal rather than a shocking anomaly. But the attention remained constant, in evaluating, a reminder that nothing she did went unobserved. Caitlin selected her meal with the same efficiency she applied to everything else: grilled chicken brown, rice steamed vegetables, a piece of cornbread that looked marginally better than usual. The food service personnel treated her with professional courtesy, and one of them, a woman in her 40s with graying hair, gave her a small nod that might have been solidarity or simply acknowledgement of shared humanity in a male-dominated space. She found a table near the back wall, positioning herself so her back was to most of the room. It wasn't ideal tactically. SEAL training emphasized maintaining awareness of your environment and controlling sightlines, but it reduced the psychological weight of constant observation. If she couldn't see all the eyes watching her, she could pretend for brief moments that she was just another sailor eating dinner and studying professional materials. For exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the pretense held. Then Brock Ashford's voice cut through the ambient noise of the mess hall like a blade. "Well, well, well, what do we have here?" The tone was theatrical, designed to carry to the surrounding tables and draw attention to whatever was about to unfold. Caitlin recognized it immediately, the voice of someone performing for an audience, looking to prove something to witnesses rather than accomplish anything substantive. She didn't turn around. She had encountered this scenario before in various forms throughout her military career, And experience had taught her that the best initial strategy was usually avoidance. Engaging with theatrical antagonism only gave it the attention and importance it sought. "I'm talking to you, sweetheart." Now there were footsteps, three distinct sets moving with deliberate purpose. Caitlin continued reading her manual, her expression unchanged, though her peripheral awareness had expanded to catalog every detail of the developing situation. The three men moved around to face her table, positioning themselves in a semicircle that would have been intimidating if intimidation had been something Caitlin was vulnerable to experiencing. After 2 years of SEAL training, including Hell Week exercises specifically designed to break participants through psychological stress, three recruits standing in front of her in a mess hall registered as background noise. Brock Ashford stood in the center, tall and blonde, with ice blue eyes that carried anger poorly disguised as confidence. To his right stood Travis Whitlock, shorter and more powerfully built, with dark hair and a stance that suggested eagerness for physical confrontation. On the left, hanging back slightly, was Garrett Hayes, red-haired and uncomfortable, his body language broadcasting reluctance to participate in whatever was about to happen. Caitlin finally looked up from her manual, her eyes meeting Brock's with the kind of steady calm that came from absolute certainty about her capabilities. "Can I help you with something, sailors?" The use of sailors, rather than any more familiar term, was deliberate, establishing professional distance, while simultaneously reminding them that military courtesy was expected regardless of personal feelings. Brock's smile was cold and performative. "Wrong building, sweetheart. This is where warriors eat, not the dependent spouse's club. That's across base near the commissary. Easy mistake to make if you're new here." Around them, conversations at nearby tables had begun to die down as other diners recognized that something noteworthy was developing. The mess hall wasn't completely silent. There were still perhaps 200 people present, and some were far enough away to remain unaware. But a bubble of attention was forming around Caitlin's table. Travis stepped forward, emboldened by Brock's opening sally. "Seriously, though, how many standards did they have to lower to get you into that uniform?" "Must have been a lot, because everyone knows women don't have the physical capability for real combat operations." Caitlin set down her fork with precise, controlled movements. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but clear, carrying the authority of someone who had nothing to prove but was willing to prove it anyway. "I earned this uniform the same way every SEAL earns it, through demonstrated performance under the most demanding training conditions the United States military can devise." "Demonstrated performance," Brock repeated mockingly, leaning forward to place his hands flat on her table. The movement was aggressive, designed to invade her personal space and create physical intimidation. "That's interesting language. Very careful. Very political. What you're not saying is that you met the same standards as the men, because we both know you didn't." He leaned closer, his voice dropping, but remaining audible to the growing audience. "Want to know how I know? Because my little brother Ethan is dead. He died 2 years ago in Afghanistan when his helicopter crashed. The pilot was female, part of the same integration initiative that put you here. Standards were adjusted, qualifications were loosened, and my 19-year-old brother burned to death because the Navy decided politics were more important than competence." The raw pain in Brock's voice was genuine, cutting through the theatrical aggression to reveal the wound beneath. For a moment, the mess hall scene transformed from simple confrontation into something more complex, a young man trying to make sense of grief by finding someone to blame, even if that blame was misdirected. Caitlin's expression softened fractionally, though her posture remained controlled and ready. "I'm sorry about your brother. No one should lose a sibling, especially under those circumstances." "I don't want your sympathy," Brock said, his voice hardening again. "I want you to understand what you represent. You're the same experiment that killed Ethan. You're here because politicians want good press and admirals want to check diversity boxes. And when you fail, and you will fail, because biology doesn't care about social engineering, other people like you are going to pay the price for your ambition." The mess hall had gone almost completely silent now, with hundreds of eyes focused on the confrontation unfolding near the back wall. In one corner, Master Chief Callahan stood with a cup of coffee halfway to his lips, watching with the expression of someone witnessing a critical moment in history. At another table, Command Master Chief William Ashford sat with his dinner, forgotten, his face unreadable, as he watched his son's performance. Caitlin stood slowly rising to her full height of 5 feet 7 inches. She was smaller than all three men facing her, outweighed by at least 50 pounds in each case. By every conventional metric of physical advantage, she was overmatched and vulnerable. But there was something in the way she stood balanced, centered, absolutely still, that made Travis take an involuntary half-step backward and caused Garrett's discomfort to spike into visible alarm. Caitlin's right hand moved to her collar, touching a small pin that the three men had failed to notice in their eagerness to make their point. It was an insignificant piece of metal easily overlooked, but to anyone who knew what to look for, it told a very specific story. "This is a SEAL trident," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent mess hall. "I am Lieutenant Caitlin Mercer, United States Navy SEALs, and you three just volunteered for an educational demonstration." The silence that followed was absolute. Brock's face went through several distinct color changes as the implications of what she had said penetrated through his anger and assumptions. "That's impossible. Everyone knows there are no women in the SEALs. That's not classified information, it's just reality." "Really?" Caitlin's voice remained quiet, but now it carried an edge that made several observers shift uncomfortably. "Are you absolutely certain about that? Because I'm standing right here wearing this uniform, and this trident and that trident tells a different story than the one you've been telling yourself." Travis had recovered from his momentary uncertainty and now stepped forward with the aggressive confidence of someone who had decided that intimidation was still a viable strategy. "Even if that's somehow true, and I'm not saying it is, it doesn't change the fundamental reality here. You still don't belong with real combat troops who've actually seen action." The words were barely out of his mouth when Caitlin moved. To most of the observers in the mess hall, what happened next probably looked like she simply took a quick step forward and slightly to the right. But suddenly, Travis was on the ground, his arm twisted behind his back in a position that was obviously uncomfortable, but carefully controlled to avoid permanent injury. 4 seconds had elapsed from the moment Travis stepped forward to the moment he found himself immobilized. 4 seconds, Caitlin said conversationally, as if she wasn't currently restraining a man who outweighed her by 30 pounds with seemingly minimal effort. That's exactly how long it took. Brock lunged forward, apparently thinking he could help his friend, or at least prove his own courage to the watching crowd. He was bigger than Caitlin by a considerable margin, and had probably assumed throughout his life that size would give him decisive advantages in any physical confrontation. He discovered very quickly that his assumptions were catastrophically incorrect. Caitlin released Travis and pivoted smoothly to her left, using Brock's own momentum against him, with the kind of fluid precision that spoke of thousands of hours of training. Her hand found his wrist, applied pressure at exactly the right angle, with exactly the right force, and suddenly the larger man was airborne. Brock hit the floor hard, the wind driven from his lungs, staring up at the ceiling, with the confused expression of someone who wasn't entirely sure what had just happened or how he had gotten there. 7 more seconds had passed. Total elapsed time, 11 seconds of actual physical contact. Garrett Hayes, the red-haired recruit who had wisely remained on the periphery, was now backing away rapidly with his hands raised in what might have been surrender or simply an attempt to distance himself from whatever was happening to his companions. Caitlin looked at him for a moment, then nodded with something that might have been approval. "Smart choice. Always recognize when you are outmatched. It's a survival skill that will serve you well." Travis was struggling to get back to his feet, his face flushed red with embarrassment and what was probably a fair amount of genuine anger. "This is assault. You can't just attack fellow service members because they hurt your feelings." Caitlin looked around the mess hall at the dozens of watching faces all focused on their table with the kind of intense attention usually reserved for natural disasters or dramatic revelations. "Attack. Does anyone here see evidence of an attack?" There was a murmur of negative responses from the crowd, along with some barely suppressed chuckles from observers who had clearly enjoyed the sudden reversal of fortune. "What I see," Caitlin continued, her voice carrying clearly throughout the silent room, "is 3 recruits who challenged the superior officer's qualifications and received a practical demonstration in combat techniques. Educational purposes only, of course." She walked back to her table and sat down, picking up her fork as if the previous 45 seconds had been nothing more than a minor interruption to her dinner routine. You're absolutely right about one thing, she said calmly, taking a bite of chicken that had gone cold during the confrontation. Every single day, I have to prove that I belong here. Every day, I have to demonstrate that I earn my place. Every day, I have to show that I'm worthy of wearing this uniform. She paused, letting her words settle over the silent mess hall. Today, you gentlemen gave me another opportunity to do exactly that. I should probably thank you for the demonstration opportunity. The three recruits slowly gathered themselves together and began moving toward the exit, their earlier swagger completely deflated and replaced by careful movements that suggested they were still processing what had just happened. Travis nursed his arm, moving it gingerly to assess for injury. Brock walked with the cautious steps of someone checking for broken ribs. Garrett looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. As they reached the door, Caitlin called out one final time. Oh, and gentlemen, next time you want to challenge someone's qualifications, you might want to actually verify those qualifications first. A simple check of personnel records could have saved you considerable embarrassment this evening. The mess hall remained silent for several long seconds after the three recruits disappeared through the exit. Then gradually conversations began, resuming cautiously at first, then with increasing animation as people processed what they had witnessed and began forming their own narratives about its significance. Caitlin continued eating her cold dinner in what was now genuine peaceful silence, though she remained aware of every eye that lingered on her, every whispered conversation that analyzed what had just occurred, every senior enlisted face that wore expressions ranging from approval to concern to calculation. She had made her point clearly and decisively. She had demonstrated her capabilities in a way that would be remembered and discussed for weeks to come. Most importantly, she had established that questioning her presence at Coronado would come with consequences that most people would prefer to avoid. But even as she finished her meal and prepared to leave, Caitlin knew with absolute certainty that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her resolve and abilities, new people who would need to be convinced that she had earned her place in the most elite fighting force in the world. That was simply the reality of being a pioneer in a field that had never welcomed people like her. The important thing was that she was ready for whatever came next, armed with the training confidence and unshakable sense of purpose that had carried her through every challenge so far. In the corner of the mess hall, Master Chief Callahan set down his coffee cup and allowed himself a small smile. In 35 years of military service, he had witnessed many defining moments, battles won and lost, warriors made, and broken institutions forced to confront their own assumptions about who could serve and how. What he had just watched was one of those moments. 45 seconds that would echo through Naval Base Coronado for years to come, forcing everyone who witnessed it to reconsider what they thought they knew about capability, competence, and what it meant to be a warrior. History, Callahan knew, didn't always announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it arrived in a mess hall on a Tuesday evening, dressed in a Navy uniform, and carrying a tactical manual ready to prove in 45 seconds what words could never accomplish. And as he watched Caitlin Mercer calmly finish her dinner and walk out of the mess hall with her shoulders straight and her expression unchanged, Robert Callahan knew he was watching history being made one demonstration at a time. The morning after the mess hall incident arrived with the kind of California dawn that made Naval Base Coronado look almost peaceful, the sun rising over the Pacific in bands of gold and crimson that painted the training facilities in warm light. But beneath that peaceful exterior, the base was humming with a different kind of energy, the electric charge that comes when an institution realizes something fundamental has shifted and no one is quite sure what the implications will be. Caitlin had been awake since 0430, which was her normal pattern. She ran her standard 5-mile route along the beach, her boots leaving temporary impressions in the sand that the tide would erase within hours. The physical exertion helped clear her mind and prepare her for whatever the day would bring, though she suspected that day 22 would be considerably different from the previous 21 days at Coronado. She was correct. At 0730 hours, a messenger appeared at her quarters with a summons to Captain Hastings' office. The timing was deliberate, early enough to convey urgency, late enough that she'd had time to complete morning PT and prepare herself mentally for whatever conversation awaited. Captain Hastings' office was located in the administrative building that overlooked the main training complex. The walls were decorated with commendations and photographs from his 25 years of service, creating a visual timeline of a successful military career that had taken him from junior officer to command positions across multiple theaters of operation. Hastings looked up as Caitlin entered and came to attention. His expression was professional and unreadable, revealing nothing about whether this summons was disciplinary or something else entirely. Lieutenant Mercer, sit down. Caitlin took the indicated chair, maintaining proper military bearing while remaining alert to whatever direction this conversation might take. Hastings studied her for a long moment before speaking. I've received multiple reports about an incident in the mess hall yesterday evening. Reports from personnel who were present, from the duty officer who reviewed security footage, and from Command Master Chief Ashford, whose son was involved in the confrontation. He paused, allowing the weight of that statement to settle. I've also personally reviewed the security camera footage from the mess hall. All of it, from the moment you entered until the moment you left. Caitlin remained silent, waiting for Hastings to arrive at whatever point he was building toward. The footage shows 3 recruits approaching your table and initiating a confrontation. It shows them making statements that could reasonably be interpreted as challenging your qualifications and presence at this installation. And it shows you responding with a demonstration of hand-to-hand combat techniques that neutralize both aggressive parties in approximately 11 seconds of actual physical contact. Hastings leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. From a purely tactical standpoint, your response was textbook. You used minimal force, maintained complete control throughout the engagement, and ensured that neither recruit sustained injuries that would require medical attention beyond minor bruising. The entire sequence demonstrated exactly the kind of measured response and technical proficiency we expect from SEAL operators. He paused again, and Caitlin sensed there was a significant qualification coming. However, Hastings continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. The political and institutional implications of what happened are considerably more complex than the tactical assessment. That footage has been seen by senior leadership up the chain of command, all the way up, chain lieutenant. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Caitlin's voice was steady and professional. You're saying that Pentagon brass have reviewed the footage, sir? Not just reviewed it, analyzed it, discussed it in meetings that included flag officers and civilian leadership. Your 45-second demonstration has become a data point in a much larger conversation about SEAL integration policy. Hastings pulled a folder from his desk and opened it. The Secretary of Defense is currently reviewing special operations integration protocols across all military branches. Your performance here at Coronado is being used as a test case, proof of concept, if you will. Every action you take, every training exercise you complete, every interaction you have with personnel is being documented and evaluated by people who have the authority to make policy decisions affecting the entire military. The implications of that statement settled over the office like a physical weight. Caitlin had known her presence at Coronado carried broader significance, but understanding it intellectually was different from hearing it stated so explicitly by her commanding officer. I need you to understand something, Lieutenant. Hastings said, his voice softer but no less serious. You're not just representing yourself anymore. Every woman who might want to serve in special operations roles is being judged by your performance. Every argument for or against integration is being supported or undermined by what you accomplish here. That's not fair and it's not right, but it's the reality you're operating in. Caitlin met his gaze directly. I understand, sir, and I'm prepared to carry that weight. Are you... Hastings' question wasn't challenging. It was genuine inquiry from a commander who needed to assess whether his personnel understood the mission they'd been assigned. Because that weight is about to get heavier, considerably heavier. He closed the folder and looked at her with an expression that carried both professional respect and personal concern. There's a base-wide combat exercise scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Designation Trident Strike. It's a comprehensive readiness drill designed to test defensive and offensive capabilities under simulated combat conditions. Caitlin waited for the other shoe to drop, knowing from Hastings' tone that there was more to this announcement than a simple training schedule update. You'll be assigned to lead a defensive team responsible for protecting the primary communications facility. It's considered a high-value target, which means you can expect concentrated attention from the opposing force. Your team will consist of 7 personnel total, including yourself. Hastings paused, choosing his next words carefully. I want to be clear about something. The team composition and exercise parameters are being determined by people whose motivations aren't entirely transparent to me. What I can tell you is that this exercise will be observed by external evaluators from Navy Special Warfare Command and possibly by Pentagon representatives who are monitoring the integration program. The subtext was clear even without being stated explicitly. The exercise would be designed to test her under maximum stress, and the people designing it might not be entirely neutral in their hopes for the outcome. Understood, sir. When will I receive my team assignments and exercise parameters? Within the next 72 hours. In the meantime, Lieutenant, I'd suggest you use whatever resources and preparation time you have available. This exercise is going to be challenging under the best of circumstances. Caitlin came to attention. Thank you for the briefing, sir. As she reached the door, Hastings called out one more time. Lieutenant, that demonstration yesterday in the mess hall, it was impressive. But impressive isn't always enough. Sometimes the people watching don't want to be impressed. They want to find reasons to confirm their pre-existing beliefs. Remember that in the days ahead. The next 6 days passed in a blur of preparation, observation, and the growing awareness that something significant was building beneath the surface of normal base operations. Equipment requisitions that had been delayed for days suddenly began processing with unusual speed, but the gear that arrived was often subtly wrong. Boots that were technically the correct size, but from a manufacturer known for running small. Tactical vests that met specifications but felt awkward and unbalanced. Nothing egregious enough to file a formal complaint about, but a pattern that suggested deliberate interference designed to look like bureaucratic incompetence. Caitlin documented everything, noting times, dates, supply, personnel involved, and specific discrepancies. The pattern remained consistent. Every problematic requisition involved personnel under the authority of Command Master Chief William Ashford. On the morning of day 25, Caitlin arrived at the training facility at 0500 hours for a private session she had requested through official channels. The request had been approved. The training space reserved everything processed through proper procedures. But when she arrived, she found the space occupied by another unit conducting unscheduled training and no record of her reservation in the facility log. She adapted without complaint, using an alternate training area that lacked the specialized equipment she had hoped to access. But the pattern was becoming undeniable. Someone with authority and access was systematically creating obstacles designed to disrupt her preparation while maintaining plausible deniability about deliberate sabotage. It was during that improvised training session that Master Chief Callahan found her. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Caitlin was working through combat scenarios on a makeshift training ground she'd established using whatever equipment and space were available. Her movements were precise and controlled, each technique practiced with the kind of focused intensity that separated adequate warriors from exceptional ones. Callahan watched her for several minutes before making his presence known, evaluating not just her technical proficiency, but the mindset and discipline she brought to solo training when no one was watching and no one was evaluating. Lieutenant, Caitlin came to attention immediately upon recognizing the Master Chief. Master Chief Callahan, good morning, sir. As you were. Callahan moved closer, his eyes taking in the improvised training setup. Heard you had some scheduling difficulties this morning. Seems to be a lot of that going around lately. The statement hung in the air between them. Acknowledgement of the pattern without explicit accusation that could be used against either of them. I'm adapting, Master Chief, making do with available resources. Callahan nodded slowly. That's good. SEALs are force multipliers because we can accomplish missions with whatever resources we have available, not just optimal conditions. He paused, his weathered face thoughtful. But there's a difference between adapting to battlefield conditions and adapting to deliberate sabotage. Important to recognize which one you're dealing with. Caitlin met his gaze steadily. I recognize the pattern, Master Chief. I figured you did. You don't survive SEAL training without developing solid pattern recognition skills. Callahan was quiet for a moment, then seemed to reach a decision. Walk with me, Lieutenant. I want to tell you a story. They moved away from the training area, walking along a path that overlooked the Pacific. The morning was cool and clear, the kind of weather that made California's reputation for perfect climate seem justified. January 1991, Callahan began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone recounting memories that remained vivid despite the passage of decades. I was leading a squad during Desert Storm. We got separated from our main unit during operations near Basra, combination of bad intelligence, worse luck, and the general chaos that happens when combat plans meet reality. He paused, looking out over the water as if seeing something beyond the present moment. We ended up surrounded by enemy forces. Best estimates put them at about 40 hostiles, with us trapped in a position that offered minimal cover and no real escape routes. By every tactical assessment, we should have been captured or killed. Caitlin listened intently, recognizing that this story was being shared for a specific purpose beyond simple reminiscence. We survived because we stopped fighting the battle they wanted us to fight and started fighting the battle we could win. Instead of trying to hold ground we couldn't defend, we went mobile. Instead of engaging on their terms, we made them engage on ours. We used our superior training and knowledge of small unit tactics to turn what should have been a massacre into a fighting withdrawal that got every one of my men home alive. Callahan turned to face her directly. The lesson isn't just about tactical flexibility, Lieutenant. The lesson is about recognizing when you're in a situation where the conventional rules don't apply and having the courage to adapt accordingly. You're saying the exercise in 2 weeks isn't going to follow conventional rules. I'm saying that when people are desperate to prove a point, they sometimes cross lines they wouldn't normally cross. And I'm saying that you need to be prepared for that possibility while maintaining your professional standards and operational discipline. They walked in silence for a few more minutes, the sound of waves providing background rhythm to their footsteps. Finally, Callahan spoke again. One more thing. The SEAL ethos includes the phrase, "The only easy day was yesterday." You know why we say that? Because every day brings new challenges that must be met with the same level of commitment and performance. That's part of it. But the deeper meaning is about understanding that proving yourself isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous process. Every single day, you earn your place again. Every single day, you demonstrate why you deserve to be here. That's not a burden unique to your situation. That's the reality every SEAL lives with throughout their entire career. Callahan paused at a vantage point that offered a clear view of the training facility spread across Coronado. The difference in your case is that you're carrying the weight of everyone who comes after you. That makes the burden heavier, but it doesn't change the fundamental approach. You prove yourself every day through actions that silence skeptics before they can speak. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small coin, a military challenge coin worn smooth by decades of handling. The insignia showed a SEAL trident with the date February 1991 and the words Desert Storm engraved below. This was given to me by my commanding officer after we made it out of that situation near Basra. He told me to carry it as a reminder that when circumstances get impossible, warriors find a way to make the impossible work anyway. Callahan held out the coin. I want you to have it, for clarity when doubt creeps in during the days ahead. Caitlin took the coin, feeling the weight of both the physical object and the symbolism it carried. Thank you, Master Chief. I'll honor this. I know you will. Now get back to your training. 2 weeks isn't much time to prepare for what's coming. Day 29 brought the Unsung that transformed abstract concerns about sabotage into concrete danger that could have resulted in serious injury or death. Caitlin had scheduled weapons qualification time at the range for 1,400 hours, a standard requirement for maintaining proficiency with the M4 carbine that served as the primary weapon system for SEAL operations. The reservation had been confirmed, the ammunition requisitioned, the range safety protocols reviewed. Everything appeared routine and properly organized. She arrived at 13:45 hours, allowing time for weapon inspection and final safety checks before the scheduled range time. The Armory Master Sergeant, a man named Randall Berg, who had managed the weapons facility for 28 years, issued her an M4 that appeared to be in perfect condition. Clean, properly maintained, all safety mechanisms functioning correctly according to standard inspection procedures. Caitlin completed her pre-firing checks with the thoroughness that SEAL training had ingrained into automatic habit. Chamber clear magazine, properly seated optics, properly aligned trigger mechanism responsive. Everything checked out within normal parameters. The range itself was configured for standard qualification courses, targets at various distances from 50 to 300 meter scenarios, designed to test accuracy under different conditions, including time fire and stress positions. Caitlin began the qualification sequence methodically, her performance consistent with the exceptional marksmanship she had demonstrated throughout her time at Coronado. Round 1 through round 46 proceeded without incident. Her groupings were tight, her times were competitive with the best shooters on base. Her technical execution was flawless. An 18-year-old recruit training at an adjacent range station watched her performance with visible admiration, the kind of honest respect that transcended gender politics and simply recognized superior skill. Round 47 changed everything. The moment Caitlin squeezed the trigger, she felt something wrong in the weapon's response. A subtle resistance, a fraction of a second delay, a vibration that shouldn't have been present. In that microsecond of awareness, her SEAL training overrode conscious thought and triggered automatic responses developed through thousands of hours of practice. She ceased fire, immediately pointed the weapon downrange in a safe direction, and stepped sideways to put her body between the weapon and the young recruit at the adjacent station. The entire sequence took perhaps 2 seconds from trigger pull to protective positioning. The M4 didn't explode. Her quick response had prevented the catastrophic failure that the sabotaged gas system had been designed to produce. But the weapon jammed hard, the bolt locked in a position that indicated dangerous overpressure in the chamber, and a thin wisp of smoke emerged from the gas port in a way that made Master Sergeant Burke's face go pale when he arrived to investigate. "Cease fire! Cease fire! All weapons safe! Clear the range!" Burke's voice carried the authority of 3 decades of experience and the alarm of someone who recognized that they had just avoided a disaster by the narrowest of margins. He approached Caitlin's position with the kind of careful movements that suggested he was treating the weapon as a potential explosive device. "Lieutenant, I need you to very carefully and very slowly set that weapon down and step away from it. Don't try to clear it. Don't try to adjust anything. Just set it down and back away." Caitlin complied with precise, controlled movements, her training allowing her to remain calm even as her body processed the adrenaline spike that came from recognizing how close she had just come to serious injury. Burke examined the weapon from a safe distance, his experienced eyes cataloging details that would tell him what had gone wrong. Then he looked up at Caitlin with an expression that combined respect and barely controlled anger. "Lieutenant, that weapon should have never been issued from my armory. Based on what I'm seeing from here, there's been a deliberate modification to the gas system designed to create exactly the kind of overpressure situation we just witnessed." The implications of that statement settled over the range like a dark cloud. This wasn't equipment failure due to poor maintenance or simple bad luck. This was deliberate sabotage. Someone with access to the armory and knowledge of weapon systems had modified that M4 specifically to cause it to fail in a way that could have resulted in catastrophic injury to whoever was firing it. Within 30 minutes, the range was swarming with safety personnel, investigators, and senior leadership trying to understand how such a fundamental security breach could have occurred. Master Sergeant Burke was visibly shaken, his professional pride wounded by the realization that his carefully managed armory had been compromised under his watch. Captain Hastings arrived within the hour, his expression grim, as he surveyed the scene and listened to Burke's preliminary assessment of what had happened. "This weapon was in my armory's inventory," Burke was saying, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "It should have been secure. It should have been safe. Someone with access, knowledge, and intent modified it specifically to cause injury. Lieutenant Mercer's training and quick reactions are the only reason we're not dealing with a medical emergency right now." Hastings turned to Caitlin, who had remained at the range to provide her account of the incident. "Are you injured, Lieutenant?" "No, sir. Minor adrenaline response, but no physical injury." "That's extremely fortunate for everyone involved." Hastings' tone made clear that he understood the broader implications beyond Caitlin's personal safety. If the sabotaged weapon had actually injured or killed her, the resulting investigation and publicity would have had ramifications extending far beyond Coronado. He pulled Caitlin aside, away from the cluster of investigators examining the weapon. "I'm ordering a full investigation, but I need you to understand something. Proving deliberate sabotage versus maintenance error or manufacturing defect is going to be difficult. And with Trident strikes scheduled in 6 days, the investigation is unlikely to produce conclusive results before the exercise." The subtext was clear. Whoever had sabotaged the weapon had chosen their timing, deliberately creating danger, while ensuring that accountability would be delayed until after the upcoming exercise. "I understand, sir. Do you?" Hastings' voice was gentle but insistent. because I need you to truly understand that someone on this base, someone with access and authority just tried to hurt you. Maybe not kill you, but certainly create a situation that could have resulted in serious injury and would have definitely raised questions about your competence and safety consciousness. He paused, making sure his next words were heard clearly. The Trident Strike exercise is your only opportunity to demonstrate your capabilities in a way that makes this sabotage campaign irrelevant. If you can perform at a level that leaves no doubt about your qualifications, then attacks on your equipment or credibility become obviously desperate and easily dismissed. But if you allow this to rattle you, if you show any sign of being intimidated or compromised, then you hand your opponents exactly the ammunition they're looking for. Caitlin absorbed this assessment, processed its implications. I'm not rattled, sir. I'm prepared. Hastings studied her face, looking for signs of bravado or false confidence. He found neither, just the steady determination of someone who had already made peace with the level of challenge they were facing. Good, because the next 6 days are going to test that preparation in ways you haven't experienced yet. That evening, Caitlin returned to her quarters feeling the first cracks in the armor of professional composure she had maintained throughout her time at Coronado. The weapon sabotage had crossed a line from professional harassment into genuine physical danger, and the reality of that escalation was beginning to sink in beneath her warrior's discipline. She sat on her rack with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the delayed physiological response to adrenaline and stress. For 2 years of SEAL training, she had pushed her body and mind to limits that most people couldn't imagine, let alone endure. She had proven her capability to handle physical pain, mental stress, and psychological pressure that broke 90% of candidates who attempted it. But training had been about proving herself to instructors whose job was to evaluate objectively. This was different. This was about people who actively wanted her to fail, who were willing to create dangerous situations to achieve that goal, and who had the access and authority to make those situations difficult to prevent or prove. For the first time since arriving at Coronado, Caitlin allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She pulled out her phone and called the one person outside the military chain of command who knew her well enough to provide the support she needed. Ann Mercer answered on the second ring. Caitlin, I was just thinking about you. Ann had been married to Caitlin's father before his death in Desert Storm and had remained a constant presence in Caitlin's life even after remarrying years later. She understood military life, understood the unique pressures of being a woman in male-dominated fields, and understood Caitlin's particular blend of determination and vulnerability better than almost anyone. Hey, Ann, do you have a few minutes? Something in Caitlin's voice must have communicated more than the words themselves, because Ann's response was immediate and focused. Of course, what's wrong? Caitlin took a breath, choosing words carefully. Someone sabotaged a weapon at the range today. Modified it so it would malfunction in a way that could have caused serious injury. I caught it in time, but now you're realizing that people are willing to hurt you to prove their point. Yeah. Ann was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had lived through her own battles against institutional resistance. Do you remember what your father used to say about courage? That it isn't the absence of fear, it's refusing to let fear win. That's right. And do you know when he told me that it was 3 days before his final deployment to Kuwait? He was scared, Caitlin. He knew the risk, knew that he might not come back, but he went anyway because the mission mattered more than his fear. Ann paused, letting that context settle. You're facing something similar now. Not the same, you're not deploying to a war zone, but you're in a situation where people are actively trying to make you fail, where the stakes are higher than just your personal career, and where being afraid would be a completely rational response to genuine danger. I don't want to be afraid. Then don't be. But also don't pretend the fear isn't real or justified. Acknowledge it, understand it, and then make the conscious choice to move forward anyway. That's what your father did. That's what every warrior throughout history has done when facing odds that should have been overwhelming. They talked for another 20 minutes, Ann sharing stories about Caitlin's father that emphasized his humanity, along with his heroism moments when he had doubted himself, struggled with fear, questioned whether he was adequate for the missions he'd been assigned. But he had never let those doubts stop him from doing what needed to be done. After the call ended, Caitlin sat for a long time holding the Desert Storm Challenge coin that Master Chief Callahan had given her. The metal was warm from being in her pocket, worn smooth by decades of handling, by men who had faced their own impossible situations and found ways to prevail. She thought about her father, about Master Chief Callahan, about every pioneer who had ever faced institutional resistance and personal danger while trying to prove that barriers could be broken. And she made the same choice they had all made to move forward, despite the fear to perform, despite the sabotage to prove through undeniable excellence that she belonged exactly where she was. The only easy day was yesterday. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Caitlin Mercer would be ready for all of them. Day 30 brought the official briefing for Trident Strike, and with it the confirmation of everything Caitlin had suspected about how the exercise was being structured. The briefing was held in the base theater at 0900 hours, with all participating personnel required to attend. The theater was packed and over 200 sailors and officers who would be involved in various capacities, plus observers and support staff who would evaluate and document the exercise. Captain Hastings stood at the podium, flanked by Command Master Chief Ashford and several other senior enlisted leaders. The sight of Ashford in a position of authority over the exercise sent a clear message about how the command structure would function during the drill. Good morning. We're here to brief the parameters for exercise Trident Strike, scheduled to commence at 0800 hours on day 35. This is a comprehensive combat readiness drill designed to test defensive and offensive capabilities under simulated combat conditions. Hastings activated a presentation that showed the basic structure of the exercise. The scenario involves a defending force tasked with protecting critical facilities against an attacking force attempting to capture or disable those facilities. Both sides will be equipped with laser tag simulation gear to track hits and casualties. Referees will be positioned throughout the area to adjudicate disputes and ensure safety protocols are maintained. The slide changed to show specific assignments. Lieutenant Mercer will command the defensive team responsible for protecting the primary communications facility. This is considered the highest value target in the exercise, which means it will receive concentrated attention from the attacking force. Caitlin noted the murmur that ran through the assembled personnel at that announcement, a mixture of surprise, skepticism, and in some cases what might have been anticipation of an entertaining failure. Lieutenant Mercer's team will consist of 7 personnel total, including herself. And the slide changed again to show the team composition, and Caitlin's suspicions about deliberate sabotage were confirmed. Her team would include only 2 experienced personnel, Petty Officers Rodriguez and Jackson, both solid performers but not exceptional. The rest of her team consisted of junior enlisted sailors with minimal combat training and 2 recruits who had only recently completed basic training. Among the recruits she noted with some surprise was Garrett Hayes, the red-haired young man who had backed away during the mess hall confrontation. The attacking force, by contrast, included 32 personnel, more than 4 times her team's size, with a composition that featured combat veterans, advanced training instructors, and experienced operators. Among them, Caitlin noted the names Brock Ashford and Travis Whitlock. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible. Even with the defensive advantages of fortified positions and interior knowledge of the facility, holding against a force that large and experienced would require near-perfect execution and probably some luck besides. Hastings continued the briefing with standard safety protocols, communication procedures, and rules of engagement. Everything sounded professional and appropriate for a training exercise. But beneath the official language, Caitlin could read the subtext clearly. This exercise was being structured to test her under conditions that would provide ample justification for failure if she couldn't perform at an exceptional level. After the briefing concluded and personnel began dispersing to their various duties, Caitlin found herself approached by a familiar figure. Garrett Hayes looked distinctly uncomfortable as he came to attention in front of her. "Lieutenant Mercer, ma'am, I should probably—" "Take your time, sailor." Garrett took a breath, gathering his courage. "I wanted to apologize for the mess hall, ma'am. What Brock and Travis did was wrong, and I should have spoken up instead of just standing there. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." Caitlin studied the young man's face, seeing genuine remorse rather than performative contrition. "Why did you request assignment to my team for the exercise?" "Because I want to be on the right side this time, ma'am." And because my grandfather landed at Normandy on June 6, 1944. He taught me that real warriors recognize courage when they see it, regardless of who's demonstrating it. I'm done being on the wrong side of history. The reference to Normandy, to the kind of courage that defined a generation, carried weight that transcended the immediate situation. Caitlin recognized in Garrett's words the same values that had motivated her father, that had driven her through SEAL training, that animated the best traditions of military service. Then I'm glad to have you on my team, Hayes. Report to the communications facility tomorrow at 0800 for preliminary reconnaissance and planning. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. As Garrett left, Caitlin noticed Master Chief Callahan standing near the theater exit, watching the interaction with the slight smile of someone who recognized a redemption arc beginning to unfold. The next 4 days passed in intensive preparation. Caitlin spent every available moment studying the communications facility, its layout, its structural vulnerabilities, its defensive advantages. She walked through every room, cataloged every entrance and exit, identified every position that could provide cover or fields of fire. She met with her team repeatedly, assessing their capabilities and beginning to forge them into a cohesive unit despite their disparate experience levels. Rodriguez and Jackson were solid professionals who quickly recognized Caitlin's competence and committed to following her leadership. The junior enlisted sailors were eager but inexperienced, requiring patient instruction on basic tactical principles. Garrett proved to be a quick study with good instincts, suggesting that his earlier poor judgment had been the result of peer pressure rather than fundamental character flaws. On day third, 2 days before the exercise, came the announcement that elevated the stakes even higher. Admiral Margaret Thornton would be observing Trident strike along with a Pentagon evaluation team. Admiral Thornton was the Navy's first female three-star admiral, a woman who had spent 40 years breaking barriers and proving that women could serve effectively at the highest levels of military leadership. Her presence meant that the exercise results would be analyzed not just at Coronado, but at the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Caitlin received a brief private audience with Admiral Thornton the afternoon before the exercise. The Admiral was 63 years old with steel gray hair and the kind of bearing that came from decades of commanding respect in environments that had never been designed to accommodate women. Her uniform displayed ribbons and commendations representing a career of exceptional service, and her eyes carried the wisdom of someone who had fought battles both on and off the battlefield. Lieutenant Mercer, I've been following your progress here at Coronado with great interest. Thank you, ma'am. Thornton studied her with the evaluating gaze of someone who understood exactly what Caitlin was facing. I spent 40 years proving that women could serve effectively in the Navy. I fought for every promotion, justified every assignment, demonstrated competence over and over, until even my most stubborn critics had to acknowledge that gender had nothing to do with capability. She paused, her expression becoming more serious. But despite all that progress, there are still doors that remain closed. The SEALs have been one of those doors, and now you're being asked to open it not just for yourself, but for every woman who might want to siento. I understand the stakes, ma'am. Do you, Thornton's question wasn't challenging. It was genuine inquiry. Because I need you to truly understand that if you fail tomorrow, the people who oppose integration will use it as evidence for another generation. They'll say, we tried it, we gave women every opportunity, and it didn't work. And hundreds of capable women will be denied opportunities because of one exercise on one day at Coronado. The weight of that responsibility settled over Caitlin like a physical burden. And if I succeed, if you succeed, if you perform at a level that leaves absolutely no doubt about your capabilities, then you open doors that have been closed since the SEALs were founded. You prove that excellence has no gender, and you give the next generation of women warriors a path forward that didn't exist before. Thornton's expression softened slightly. No pressure, right? Despite the tension, Caitlin smiled. No pressure at all, ma'am. Good. Because pressure is just another environmental factor to be managed and overcome. And from what I've seen of your record, you've overcome considerably more challenging environmental factors than an exercise at Coronado. As Caitlin prepared to leave, Admiral Thornton added one final thought. Your father would be proud of you, Lieutenant. John Mercer was a warrior's warrior, and you're carrying forward his legacy in ways that would make him incredibly proud. The mention of her father nearly broke through Caitlin's professional composure. Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know. The evening before Trident Strike, Caitlin found herself in the base chapel, a small, quiet space that offered temporary refuge from the constant observation and pressure that defined her existence at Coronado. She wasn't particularly religious in any formal sense, but there was something about the chapel that felt right for this moment. A place to gather her thoughts, to connect with something larger than herself, to remember why she was doing this. She pulled out her father's dog tags, the ones he had worn during Desert Storm, the ones that had been returned to her family after his death in 1991. The metal was worn and tarnished, but the engraved information was still legible: his name, his service number, his blood type. Caitlin held the tags and spoke quietly to her father's memory. Dad, tomorrow I fight for something bigger than myself. I fight for every woman who will come after me, for every girl who dreams of serving her country without limits, for every warrior who's ever been told they don't belong. She paused, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. I'm scared, not of the combat or the tactical challenges. I'm ready for those. I'm scared of failing everyone who's depending on me. I'm scared of closing doors instead of opening them. I'm scared of letting down people I'll never meet, but whose futures depend on what I do tomorrow. The chapel was silent except for the distant sound of waves against the shore, a reminder that the Pacific had been witnessing human struggles and triumphs for millennia, and would continue long after tomorrow's exercise was forgotten by everyone except those whose lives it directly affected. Caitlin thought about the Desert Storm Challenge coin in her pocket, about Master Chief Callahan's story of surviving against impossible odds, about her father's definition of courage as refusing to let fear win. And she made peace with the fear she was feeling, accepting it as rational response to genuine stakes, while refusing to let it compromise her performance. Tomorrow would bring the most important test of her military career. Tomorrow would determine not just her future, but the future of countless women who wanted to serve in roles that had never been open to them. Tomorrow would prove whether capability could overcome prejudice, whether excellence could break down barriers, whether one warrior's performance could change an institution's understanding of who belonged in its most elite ranks. Caitlin Mercer was ready. The only easy day was yesterday. Tomorrow she would make history one way or another. Day 35 arrived with the kind of false calm that often precedes significant events. The sky over Naval Base Coronado was clear and blue, the temperature mild, the Pacific breeze carrying the familiar salt scent that had become part of Caitlin's daily existence over the past 5 weeks. Nothing about the morning suggested that the next several hours would determine the trajectory of military integration policy for years to come. Caitlin had been awake since 0430, her internal clock refusing to allow anything resembling rest, despite her body's need for it. She had gone through her standard morning routine with mechanical precision, physical training, shower equipment, check, mental preparation. By 0730, she was standing outside the communications facility, reviewing her defensive plans one final time before her team assembled. The communications facility was a 2-story concrete structure located near the center of the base housing equipment that would be critical for coordinating defensive operations during an actual emergency. The building had multiple entry points: a main entrance facing south, a secondary entrance on the east side, a maintenance access on the north wall, and an emergency exit on the west. The roof was accessible via internal stairs, offering elevated positions that could provide excellent fields of fire, but also exposure to attacking forces with proper equipment. Caitlin had studied this building for 4 days straight, memorizing every detail, identifying every tactical advantage and vulnerability. She knew which rooms offered the best cover, which corridors created natural choke points, which positions would allow overlapping fields of fire. The facility had become as familiar to her as her own quarters, every inch of it mapped in her tactical consciousness. At RO 800 hours, her team assembled in the facility's main room for final briefing. The 7 members of her defensive force represented the full spectrum of military experience and capability that Caitlin had been assigned to weld into an effective fighting unit. Petty Officer Rodriguez was 30 years old with 8 years of naval service and a solid record of competence in conventional operations. He was professional, reliable, and willing to follow Caitlin's leadership despite initial skepticism about serving under a female SEAL. Petty Officer Jackson was 28 with 6 years of service, similarly capable and professional, his earlier doubts about Caitlin's qualifications having evaporated after watching her work during the preparation phase. Seaman Williams Foster and Thompson were all in their early 20s, with 2 to 3 years of service junior enlisted personnel who knew enough to be useful but lacked the combat experience that would allow them to operate autonomously under pressure. They would need clear direction and constant oversight, but they were eager and willing to learn. The final two team members were the newest recruits. Palmer was 19 years old and had completed basic training only 6 weeks earlier. He was nervous but determined, clearly aware that he was in over his head, but refusing to show it. And then there was Garrett Hayes, the red-haired 21-year-old, who had been part of the mess hall confrontation and who had requested assignment to Caitlin's team as a form of redemption. Caitlin looked at the six faces watching her with varying degrees of confidence and concern, and she understood that their success or failure would depend almost entirely on her ability to maximize their individual capabilities while compensating for their collective inexperience. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. Caitlin began, her voice carrying the authority that came from absolute certainty about her tactical knowledge. We are outmanned 32-7. We are outmatched in terms of experience and combat credentials. By every conventional metric, we should lose this exercise decisively. She paused, letting that reality sink in before continuing. But conventional metrics don't account for three critical advantages we possess. First, we know this facility intimately, while they'll be operating in unfamiliar terrain. Second, we can create defensive positions that force them to engage on our terms rather than theirs. And third, we have something they don't expect: a willingness to adapt our tactics based on what the situation demands, rather than following textbook approaches that they can predict and counter. Rodriguez spoke up, his voice respectful but questioning. Ma'am, even with those advantages, the numbers are severely against us. How do we prevent them from simply overwhelming our positions through superior force? By refusing to fight the battle they expect, Caitlin replied. They anticipate we'll establish static defensive positions and try to hold ground. Instead, we're going to implement mobile defense doctrine, maintaining flexibility, creating overlapping fields of fire, and being willing to cede ground temporarily in order to maintain tactical advantage. She moved to a whiteboard where she had sketched the facility layout. Rodriguez and Jackson, you'll anchor our primary defensive positions here and here, covering the main entrance and eastern approach. Williams, Foster, and Thompson, you'll function as a roving patrol, providing reinforcement wherever pressure develops and preventing them from achieving uncontested access to secondary entrances. Palmer, you'll serve as runner, maintaining communication between positions if our radios are jammed or compromised. Hayes, you'll coordinate communications and serve as my second-in-command for the defensive position. Garrett looked surprised at being given that responsibility. Ma'am, I'm the least experienced person here except for Palmer. Why? Because you've demonstrated good tactical instincts during our preparation, and because you understand what this exercise means beyond simple training objectives, Caitlin interrupted. This isn't just about experience. It's about commitment, adaptability, and willingness to execute under pressure. I need someone in that coordination role who understands the stakes and won't fold when things get difficult. She looked around at her assembled team. Make no mistake, things will get difficult. The attacking force includes combat veterans and advanced instructors. They have superior numbers and equipment advantages we can't match directly. But what they don't have is the motivation we possess. They're executing a training exercise. We're proving something that matters beyond this day. Jackson raised his hand. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Granted. Some of us weren't sure about serving under your command when the assignments came down. No disrespect intended, but there were questions about whether this was a political assignment or a tactical one. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But watching how you've prepared for this exercise, seeing the level of detail and tactical thinking you've brought to the planning, we're ready to follow your lead wherever it goes. Just wanted you to know that. Several other team members nodded agreement, and Caitlin felt something shift in the dynamic of the group. They had moved from skeptical subordinates to committed teammates united by shared purpose and growing respect for her leadership. Thank you, Jackson. That means a lot. Caitlin checked her watch. We have 45 minutes before the exercise officially begins. Final equipment checks position assignments, and then we wait for them to make the first move. At precisely 0800 hours, the announcement came over the base-wide communication system that Exercise Trident Strike was now active. Caitlin's team was in position, equipment checked and ready, each member understanding their role in the defensive strategy she had developed. For the first hour, the attacking force conducted reconnaissance of the facility and surrounding area, probing for weaknesses without committing to direct assault. Caitlin observed their movements from a concealed position on the facility's second floor, cataloging their tactics and trying to identify patterns that would reveal their intended strategy. What she saw was professional and competent, but not particularly creative. The attacking force was following textbook approaches to assaulting a defended position, establish observation posts, identify access points, coordinate multiple approach vectors, prepare for simultaneous assault from different directions. It was sound tactical doctrine, the kind of methodology taught in every military training program and proven effective through decades of combat operations. But it was also predictable, which meant Caitlin could anticipate their moves and prepare appropriate countermeasures. At 09:15 hours, the first serious contact occurred. 6 members of the attacking force approached the main entrance in a standard tactical formation, advancing by fire and movement in exactly the way that competent infantry units had operated for generations. Rodriguez and Jackson engaged them from prepared positions that offered superior cover and excellent fields of fire. The simulated combat that followed was intense but controlled, with both sides demonstrating professional competence. The attacking force quickly realized they were facing disciplined defensive fire and withdrew to reassess their approach. Caitlin monitored the engagement from her observation post, satisfied that her team was performing well, but aware that this initial contact was merely exploratory. The attacking force testing their defenses and gathering intelligence for the real assault that would follow. That assault came at 09:35 hours this time, from 3 directions simultaneously. The main entrance received another probing attack while separate elements attempted to breach through the eastern secondary entrance and the northern maintenance access. It was a coordinated effort that demonstrated solid tactical planning and would have overwhelmed most defensive positions through sheer weight of numbers. But Caitlin had anticipated exactly this approach and had prepared accordingly. Her roving patrol was positioned to provide rapid reinforcement wherever pressure developed, creating temporary numerical advantages at critical points. The overlapping fields of fire she had established meant that attackers approaching one entrance found themselves exposed to covering fire from defenders positioned to support adjacent access points. For 15 minutes, the engagement continued at high intensity. Simulated weapons fire filled the air as laser tag equipment tracked hits and casualties. Referees moved through the area, making official determinations about which engagements resulted in valid eliminations and which could be disputed based on cover positioning or timing. When the attacking force withdrew to regroup, the referee count showed 8 of their personnel had been eliminated versus 0 losses for Caitlin's defensive team. It was an encouraging start, but Caitlin knew that Brock Ashford and whoever was directing the attacking force's strategy would adapt their approach based on what they had learned. She was proven correct at 09:55 hours when the attacking force shifted tactics entirely. Instead of continuing with frontal assaults that were proving costly, they began attempting infiltration, small teams trying to bypass the defensive perimeter and gain access to the facility through stealth rather than overwhelming force. Caitlin watched this tactical shift unfold and recognized that it presented both danger and opportunity. Infiltration tactics could succeed if the attacking teams were skilled enough and lucky enough to find gaps in her defensive coverage. But infiltration also meant the attacking force would be splitting into smaller, more vulnerable units that could be defeated in detail if she could identify and intercept them. It was at this moment that Caitlin made the decision that would define the rest of the exercise. Instead of maintaining her position in the facility's observation post, coordinating defensive operations from a static command location, she would go mobile, transforming from commander to active combatant and using her superior individual skills to hunt the infiltrating teams. She keyed her radio to the command frequency. "Hayes, you have command of the defensive position. Maintain current, assignments, and fields of fire. I'm going mobile to address the infiltration attempts." Garrett's voice came back uncertain but determined. "Understood, ma'am. You're going outside the perimeter." "Affirmative. They're trying to infiltrate, which means they're presenting small, vulnerable targets. I'm going to make them pay for every step they take." Rodriguez's voice cut in concerned but professional. "Ma'am, going solo against multiple infiltration teams is extremely high risk." "Acknowledged. but the alternative is letting them slip past our defenses and compromise the facility from inside. This is SEAL doctrine. When outnumbered, you don't fight defensively. You become the aggressor and make them react to you instead of executing their planned strategy. Caitlin took minimal gear, her M4 carbine configured with a laser tag equipment, her sidearm, a combat knife, and her communications earpiece. She moved through the facility with practiced silence, exiting through a concealed position that the attacking force hadn't identified during their reconnaissance. Within minutes, she had transitioned from defender to hunter, and the nature of exercise Trident Strike fundamentally changed. The first infiltration team she intercepted consisted of 4 attackers attempting to approach the facility from the west, using a line of concrete barriers for cover as they advanced. They were moving with reasonable tactical discipline, maintaining proper spacing and mutual support, clearly experienced enough to know how to conduct a coordinated approach. But they had never trained to defend against a SEAL operator hunting them from an unexpected angle. Caitlin approached from their flank using the same barriers they relied on for cover to conceal her movement. Her training allowed her to move with near-perfect silence, controlling every footfall and breath, becoming effectively invisible despite operating in broad daylight. She closed to within 15 meters before the lead attacker sensed something wrong and began to turn. By then it was too late. Caitlin engaged with controlled precision her laser tag weapon, registering hits on all 4 attackers in a sequence that took less than 90 seconds. The referees confirmed all 4 as valid eliminations, their expressions showing professional appreciation for the tactical execution they had just witnessed. The attacking team's radio chatter revealed their confusion and growing concern. "West team is down. All 4 eliminated. We never even saw her." Caitlin didn't pause to celebrate or acknowledge the successful engagement. She was already moving to her next position, having identified through radio intercepts that another infiltration team was attempting to approach from the north. This second engagement took longer, approximately 10 minutes of careful stalking, as Caitlin positioned herself to intercept a 3-person team that was demonstrating notably better tactical awareness than the first group. She identified their route of approach, predicted their most likely position in 3 minutes based on their current movement pattern, and established an ambush position that would give her maximum advantage. When the team moved into her kill zone, Caitlin engaged from an elevated position that provided both cover and superior angles of fire. 2 attackers were eliminated immediately. The third managed to identify her position and return fire, but Caitlin had already displaced a secondary cover using the building's architecture to her advantage. The brief firefight that followed ended with the third attacker eliminated and Caitlin unmarked. The psychological impact of these engagements on the attacking force was becoming evident through their radio communications, which Caitlin's team was monitoring from inside the facility. "Where is she?" "Jenkins' team is down, all 3 eliminated." "She's not defending anymore. She's hunting us." Travis Whitlock's voice came across the radio, barely controlled panic evident, despite his attempt at professional composure. "This isn't going according to plan. She's not operating like a defensive commander. She's operating like a SEAL someone else finished, because that's what she is." At 10:15 hours, Brock Ashford's voice cut through the radio chatter with the authority of someone who had decided that desperate measures were required. "All teams cease infiltration attempts. Consolidate at Rally Point Alpha. We're going to end this with overwhelming force at the primary entrance. If she's outside hunting, the facility is vulnerable. We concentrate all remaining personnel for a decisive assault." Caitlin heard this transmission from her position approximately 50 meters from the facility's eastern perimeter. She had eliminated 12 members of the attacking force through her mobile operations, reducing their effective strength from 32 to 20. The numbers were still against her team, but the odds were considerably better than they had been at the exercise's start. More importantly, the attacking force had abandoned their tactical flexibility and was committing to a direct assault, exactly the kind of engagement that Caitlin's defensive positions were optimized to defeat. She keyed her radio to the command frequency. "Hayes, prepare for massed assault on primary entrance. Attacking forces consolidating for final push. Estimated 20 personnel remaining. I'm returning to the facility to coordinate final defense." Garrett's voice came back steady and confident, the uncertainty from earlier in the exercise replaced by growing competence under pressure. "Defensive positions are ready, ma'am. We're tracking their consolidation through observation posts. Rodriguez and Jackson are positioned with optimal fields of fire on the main approach. Good work. Hold current positions and wait for my arrival before engaging. We're going to let them commit fully before we spring the trap. Caitlin moved back toward the facility using the same stealth techniques that had allowed her successful engagements with the infiltration teams. She reached the building's western entrance without detection and slipped inside, quickly moving to the second-floor observation post, where she could coordinate the final phase of the defense. From this elevated position, she had clear sight lines to the main entrance and the open ground that any attacking force would have to cross. Rodriguez and Jackson were positioned at ground level with excellent cover and overlapping fields of fire that would create a devastating kill zone for anyone attempting to breach the entrance. The roving patrol was positioned to provide enfilading fire from flanking positions, creating a crossfire that would catch attackers from multiple angles simultaneously. It was a defensive setup that maximized every advantage her team possessed while exploiting the attacking force's decision to abandon tactical flexibility in favor of brute force assault. At 10:30 hours, the attacking force began their final push. 20 personnel, everyone who remained after Caitlin's hunting operations, had eliminated 12 of their original strength, advanced toward the primary entrance in a formation that prioritized mass over finesse. They came with confidence born from superior numbers and combat experience, certain that even a reduced force of 20 could overwhelm a defensive team of 7 through sheer weight of assault. It was sound tactical reasoning based on conventional military doctrine and historical precedent for how such engagements typically resolved. But conventional doctrine hadn't accounted for defenders who understood advanced tactical principles and were willing to implement them flawlessly under pressure. Caitlin waited until the attacking force had committed fully to their approach, advancing into the open ground where they would have minimal cover and maximum exposure. Then she gave the order that would decide the exercise's outcome. All positions engage at will. Make every shot count. What followed was 15 minutes of the most intense simulated combat that Exercise Trident Strike would witness. Rodriguez and Jackson opened fire from their prepared positions, their disciplined shooting eliminating 4 attackers in the initial engagement. The roving patrol engaged from flanking positions, creating the crossfire effect that Caitlin had designed into her defensive plan. Attackers found themselves taking simulated fire from multiple angles. Simultaneously, their numerical advantage negated by superior positioning and tactical execution. Caitlin engaged from her elevated position, her marksmanship training, allowing her to identify and eliminate key personnel in the attacking formation, the leaders attempting to coordinate the assault, the most aggressive attackers trying to push through defensive fire, the personnel trying to establish covering positions that would support their teammates' advance. The referees moved through the chaos, confirming eliminations, their tallies showing the attacking force's numbers dropping rapidly as Caitlin's defensive strategy proved devastatingly effective. 20 attackers became 15, then 12, then 8, as the assault lost cohesion and momentum. Brock Ashford was among those still standing, his tactical vest showing no laser tag hits despite the intense fire his team had absorbed. He pushed forward with 4 remaining teammates, apparently determined to breach the facility entrance through sheer willpower and refusal to accept defeat. Caitlin watched him advance and recognized in his movements the same desperate determination that had motivated the mess hall confrontation 5 weeks earlier. This wasn't just about winning a training exercise for Brock, it was about proving that his worldview was correct, that the loss of his brother meant something, that fighting against integration was justified by genuine concern rather than prejudice. At 10:42 hours, Brock and his 3 remaining teammates reached the facility entrance. They had sustained casualties that should have eliminated them from the exercise, but in the confusion of intense combat, some hits had gone unconfirmed by referees or were being disputed based on cover and timing questions. Brock personally led the final push into the facility's main room, where he found himself face-to-face with Caitlin, who had descended from her observation post to meet the assault directly. For a moment, they stood perhaps 10 feet apart, both breathing hard from exertion and adrenaline, both aware that this confrontation had implications far beyond the immediate tactical situation. "This isn't over," Brock said, his voice carrying both exhaustion and stubborn refusal to concede. "Even if we lose today, the fundamental questions remain. You might be exceptional, I'll grant you that after watching what you did out there. But exceptional individuals don't prove that systematic integration will work. They prove that rare outliers exist, which is something we already knew. Caitlin lowered her weapon slightly, though she maintained ready position in case the engagement resumed. Your brother deserved better than what happened to him, but he didn't deserve to have his memory used as justification for denying opportunities to people who are willing and able to serve. Ethan would want you to honor his sacrifice by supporting warriors who meet the standards, not by maintaining barriers that have nothing to do with capability. You don't know what Ethan would want. Brock shot back, pain evident beneath the anger. You didn't know him. You didn't watch him grow up dreaming of military service. You didn't. His voice broke, and for the first time since the exercise began, the young man beneath the antagonistic exterior became visible. Brock Ashford wasn't primarily motivated by prejudice or institutional conservatism. He was motivated by grief that had never properly processed by guilt, that he hadn't protected his younger brother by the desperate human need to find meaning in senseless loss. Caitlin's voice softened fractionally while maintaining the authority that the situation demanded. I didn't know Ethan, but I knew my father, Marine sniper, killed in Desert Storm when I was 5 years old. I grew up with his absence, with questions about whether his sacrifice meant something or was just random chance in the chaos of war. And I learned that honoring his memory meant being the best warrior I could possibly become, not by limiting who else could serve beside me. She paused, letting that parallel settle. Your brother would be proud of your service, but he'd be more proud if your service was motivated by commitment to excellence, rather than by limiting others' opportunities because you were afraid of change. The silence that followed was broken by a referee's voice announcing through a megaphone, "Exercise concluded. Final assessment. Defensive objectives secured. Attacking force sustained unsustainable casualties. Lieutenant Mercer's team achieves complete tactical victory." The official announcement seemed to drain something from Brock, the last reserves of determination that had kept him pushing forward, despite the evidence accumulating around him that his assumptions were wrong. He lowered his weapon and looked at Caitlin with an expression that combined exhaustion, grudging respect, and the first hints of reconsidering beliefs he had held as absolute truth. "How did you do it?" he asked quietly. "We had more than 4 times your numbers. We had combat veterans and instructors. We had every tactical advantage except defensive positioning. How did 7 people defeat 32? We didn't," Caitlin replied. 7 people working as a cohesive team with superior tactical planning and perfect execution defeated 32 people who assumed numerical advantage would be decisive. The lesson isn't about me being exceptional. The lesson is about what becomes possible when you maximize every advantage available and refuse to accept limitations that others try to impose. She extended her hand to Brock, a gesture of professional respect, between warriors who had tested each other thoroughly. "You fought well today. Your team executed solid tactics and demonstrated real competence. You lost because I was better prepared and more willing to adapt, not because you were incompetent. There's no shame in that, only opportunity to learn and improve for next time." Brock looked at her extended hand for a long moment, processing everything that had transpired over the past 5 weeks, from the mess hall confrontation through the sabotage attempts to this final exercise that had disproven every assumption he had brought to the engagement. Then he reached out and clasped her hand firmly. "I owe you an apology. For the mess hall, for the assumptions I made, for the way I've treated you since you arrived at Coronado. I was wrong. Not about Ethan. I'll never stop grieving my brother or wishing things had been different. But I was wrong to blame you and people like you for what happened to him." "Apology accepted," Caitlin said. "And for what it's worth, I hope you continue your service. The Navy needs warriors who care as deeply as you do about protecting their brothers in arms. We just need to make sure that protection comes from maintaining high standards, not from excluding people who can meet those standards." The aftermath of Exercise Trident Strike unfolded over the following hours and days, with the kind of institutional process that accompanied any significant military event requiring official review and assessment. Captain Hastings convened a formal after-action briefing at 1400 hours, with all exercise participants required to attend, along with the referee team, Admiral Thornton, and the Pentagon evaluation observers. The base theater was packed with personnel eager to hear the official assessment of what many already recognized as a historic performance. The referee's statistics told a story that would become part of Coronado lore. Caitlin's defensive team had eliminated 28 of the attacking force's 32 personnel while sustaining 0 confirmed casualties among their own ranks. The 4 attacking personnel who survived were those who had never successfully engaged defensive positions. They had been eliminated from effective participation, but not officially confirmed as casualties due to disputed circumstances around their eliminations. More significantly, Caitlin personally accounted for 16 eliminations during her mobile hunting operations, a number that exceeded the combined eliminations of the entire attacking force against all defensive personnel. It was the kind of combat ratio that appeared in special operations legend, but rarely in documented training exercises. Admiral Thornton stood to address the assembled personnel, her bearing reflecting 4 decades of military service and the weight of understanding what she had witnessed. I have observed hundreds of training exercises throughout my career, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent theater. I've seen exceptional individual performances and outstanding team coordination. I've witnessed tactical innovation and strategic brilliance, but I have never in 40 years of naval service seen anything quite like what Lieutenant Mercer and her team accomplished today. She paused, looking directly at Caitlin, who sat in the front row maintaining professional composure despite the intensity of the moment. What we observed was not simply competent execution of defensive doctrine. What we observed was tactical mastery at a level that would be exceptional regardless of the operator's gender experience level or any other demographic consideration. Lieutenant Mercer demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive leadership and combat excellence that defines the SEAL community at its finest. Admiral Thornton's gaze swept across the assembled personnel. For those who question whether women could perform effectively in special operations roles today, provided a definitive answer. The question was never about capability. It was about whether institutional bias would allow capability to be recognized and utilized. Lieutenant Mercer has forced that recognition through performance that leaves no room for doubt or qualification. The briefing continued with detailed tactical analysis of the exercise, highlighting specific decisions and executions that contributed to the defensive team's success. Rodriguez and Jackson were commended for disciplined fire control and professional execution under pressure. Garrett Hayes received special recognition for his effective coordination during Caitlin's mobile operations and his demonstrated growth from the beginning to the end of the exercise. But the central focus remained on Caitlin's performance, not just her tactical decisions during the exercise itself, but the preparation, planning, and leadership that had enabled a severely outmatched team to achieve decisive victory against a numerically superior force. After the official briefing concluded, Captain Hastings pulled Caitlin aside for a private conversation in his office. "Lieutenant, I've received orders from Navy Special Warfare Command regarding your next assignment. Effective immediately, you're being transferred to SEAL Team 3 with deployment to the Middle East scheduled in 60 days. The significance of that assignment was clear. SEAL Team 3 conducted some of the most sensitive and dangerous operations in the Navy's Special Operations portfolio. Assignment to Team 3 was recognition not just of capability, but of trust in Caitlin's ability to perform under real combat conditions, where the stakes extended far beyond training exercises and career advancement. In addition, Hastings continued, there will be an official investigation into the equipment sabotage and interference you experienced during your time here. Master Sergeant Burke's preliminary findings indicate that multiple personnel were involved in modifying that weapon, and all of them had connections to Command Master Chief Ashford's immediate staff. Hastings' expression showed professional disappointment mixed with personal anger. CMC Ashford has been relieved of his position pending investigation. The evidence suggests he orchestrated the sabotage campaign and exercise manipulation in an attempt to create conditions that would ensure your failure. He'll face courts-martial proceedings and almost certainly forced retirement with reduction in rank." Caitlin absorbed this information with mixed feelings. She felt vindication that the sabotage would be officially acknowledged and addressed, but she also recognized the human tragedy beneath the official charges. A father who had allowed grief over his son's death to twist into destructive behavior that ultimately destroyed his own career. What about Brock Sir and Travis Whitlock? They'll receive formal reprimands and mandatory leadership counseling, but no courts-martial. The investigation concludes they were influenced by Brock's father and motivated by genuine, if misguided, concerns rather than malicious intent. Both have expressed remorse and requested opportunities to continue their service. Hastings leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. Off the record, Lieutenant, what you accomplished here goes far beyond one exercise or one assignment. You've proven something that needed proving, and you've opened doors that have been closed since the SEAL community was founded. That matters more than you probably realize right now. 5 days after Exercise Trident Strike, Master Chief Robert Callahan's retirement ceremony was held on the parade ground overlooking the Pacific. It was a clear autumn afternoon, the kind of day that made Coronado seem like the best posting in the entire Navy. Callahan stood at attention as Captain Hastings read the official commendation recognizing 35 years of distinguished service. The assembled personnel included SEALs from across multiple generations, men who had served with Callahan during the Cold War Desert Storm, and countless classified operations that would never be publicly acknowledged. When it came time for Callahan's final address, he stood at the podium and looked out over faces that represented the entire history of his military career. Then his gaze found Caitlin standing in formation with her SEAL Team 3 deployment orders already processed. 40 years ago, Callahan began his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak truth regardless of how uncomfortable it might make his audience. I watched the first Black SEALs fight for recognition in a community that wasn't sure it was ready to accept them. I watched them face out skepticism and active resistance from people who believed integration would compromise our capabilities and traditions. He paused, letting that historical context settle. Those pioneering warriors silenced their critics through results that couldn't be argued with. They showed that what mattered wasn't the color of a warrior's skin, it was the strength of their resolve, the depth of their skill, and their courage when bullets flew. Callahan's gaze remained on Caitlin as he continued. Today I witnessed Lieutenant Caitlin Mercer accomplish something equally significant. She proved through performance that was undeniable, exceptional, and absolutely unquestionable that women can serve effectively in special operations roles. Not as social experiments or political statements, but as warriors who have earned their place through the same standards and demonstrated the same excellence that defines the SEAL community at its finest. His voice grew stronger, carrying the conviction of someone delivering a message he considered essential. The SEAL ethos includes the phrase, "The only easy day was yesterday." We say that because we understand that excellence isn't a destination. It's a continuous journey of proving yourself every single day against standards that never lower and expectations that never diminish. Callahan removed his SEAL Trident from his uniform, the pin he had worn for 35 years, through operations across multiple continents and conflicts that span generations. He stepped down from the podium and walked directly to where Caitlin stood at attention. Lieutenant Mercer, I want you to have this. It represents everything I've believed about this community throughout my entire career, that we are warriors first, that excellence is measured by performance rather than demographics, and that the only thing that matters is whether you can accomplish the mission when lives are on the line. He pinned his trident next to the one Caitlin already wore, the gesture symbolic of passing the torch from one generation to the next. Carry this forward. Remember that every day you're not just proving yourself, you're opening doors for everyone who comes home after you. That's not a burden. That's a privilege and an honor. The ceremony concluded with the traditional honors, but the moment that would be remembered was Master Chief Robert Callahan, legendary SEAL operator, with 35 years of distinguished service, publicly acknowledging that Caitlin Mercer represented the future of a community he had devoted his life to defending and improving. 6 months later, Lieutenant Caitlin Mercer stood on the deck of a classified vessel somewhere in the Persian Gulf, reviewing mission briefings for a hostage rescue operation that would deploy her SEAL Team 3 unit against a terrorist compound holding American civilians. Her team had changed significantly since Coronado. Garrett Hayes was now Petty Officer Hayes, having earned promotion through demonstrated competence and commitment. Rodriguez and Jackson had both requested assignment to Team 3 specifically to serve under Caitlin's leadership. 2 additional female SEAL candidates had completed training and been assigned to the team, their path made possible by what Caitlin had proven at Coronado. The mission brief was complex and dangerous, the kind of operation that justified SEAL training and capabilities. Multiple hostile combatants, uncertain intelligence about facility layout, civilian casualties, possible if execution wasn't perfect. It was exactly the kind of challenge that Caitlin had prepared for throughout her entire military career. As she reviewed the tactical plans with her team, a message arrived via secure communication channel. It was from Brock Ashford, whose younger sister Casey had just completed Hell Week and was continuing through the SEAL training pipeline. The message was brief but significant. Lieutenant Mercer, my sister is going to make it through BUDS. The instructors say she's one of the strongest candidates in her class. I wanted to thank you for showing me that capability has no gender and for giving Casey the opportunity to prove what I should have known all along. My brother would have been proud to serve alongside warriors like you and Casey. Thank you for teaching me what real honor looks like. Semper Fi Brock. Caitlin read the message twice, feeling satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. Brock's transformation from antagonist to supporter represented exactly the kind of institutional change that her performance at Coronado had been designed to catalyze. His sister's success in training proved that doors once opened stayed open, allowing capability to flourish regardless of who possessed it. She looked around at her team, the mixed-gender unit that represented the future of special operations, assembled not through political quotas or social engineering, but through the simple principle that excellence should be recognized and utilized wherever it appeared. Master Chief Callahan's voice echoed in her memory. The only easy day was yesterday. Tomorrow would bring a combat operation with real stakes and genuine danger. Tomorrow would test everything Caitlin had learned and proven over the past year. Tomorrow would provide another opportunity to demonstrate that she belonged exactly where she was, not as a woman in the SEALs, but as a warrior who had earned her place through performance that left no doubt. 3 recruits had cornered her in a mess hall at Naval Base Coronado. 45 seconds later, they learned she was a SEAL. But the lesson that followed over the next 45 days had taught everyone something more important. Excellence is measured not by demographics or expectations, but by performance when everything is on the line. And on that day in that exercise against impossible odds, Caitlin Mercer hadn't just met the standard. She had become it. The only easy day was yesterday. Tomorrow she would make history again, one mission at a time, one life saved at a time, one barrier broken at a time. Because that's what warriors do. They prove themselves every single day without excuses and without limits until excellence becomes undeniable. And the only question that matters is whether you are ready for the mission. Caitlin Mercer was ready. She had always been ready. And now finally the institution she served was ready for her too.